Right, we're live on YouTube and we're starting to play the video now.
Hi, Munya, there's no sound. Munya, there's no sound.
Hi, Dr. Precious. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello. I can hear you. Can you hear me? No, you're muted. No, we are fine. We're fine.
How are you? I think there's a slight delay in our connection. Yes. I can hear you.
I can hear you loud and clear. Just
Okay. We'll start in a second. I would just. Apologies for the delay. It's not yet showing on YouTube, so we're just trying to correct that so our viewers can be let in. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Living Beyond Limits webinar with our keynote speaker, Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe. My name is Rumbidzai Mashele, and I sit on the regional board of the Businesswomen's Association of South Africa. BOASA is the largest and most prominent association of business and professional women in South Africa and the voice of women in business. BOASA's history dates back to 1980. BOASA has over 8,000 members in 7 branches across the country. The organization was created as a platform for the inspiration and empowerment of women in business and in corporate South Africa through various initiatives to assist in the creation of professional and business connections and to access new opportunities. In line with its purpose, BOASA, together with the Directors Association, is celebrating Women's Month 2021 with a series of online events designed for growth, inspiration, learning, and empowerment. This year, we're kicking off Women's Month by discussing how to navigate the multidimensional stresses of leadership, which are currently being exacerbated by COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only led to unparalleled socioeconomic impact, but is also generating a global mental health crisis and increased vulnerability at the household level. What is becoming clearer is that the pandemic-related shocks, disruptions, and massive amounts of uncertainty will have serious long-term implications for how professional and businesswomen navigate and lead in the world. This evening, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Precious Moloi-Motsepe to discuss living beyond limits in this new normal. Dr. Moloi-Motsepe established the first women's clinic in Sandton, following her medical training in Richmond, Virginia. She received the Elizabeth Chabalala Award, as well as the International Women's Forum of South Africa Excellence Award for her efforts. Driven by a passion for Africa and the talent of African people, in 2007, Dr. Moloi-Motsepe founded African Fashion International, AFI. Through AFI, Dr. Moloi-Motsepe has created a legion of successful designers from South Africa and the rest of Africa, and they have gone on to dress icons including Michelle Obama and Beyonce. Dr. Moloi-Motsepe is the Chancellor of the University of Cape Town and a philanthropist. Together with her husband, Patrice Motsepe, Dr. Moloi-Motsepe founded the Motsepe Foundation. Together with companies owned by the family, the Motsepe family contributed 1 billion rand to COVID-19 relief in South Africa during the pandemic. Dr. Moloi-Motsepe, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to the broader BWSA people, the partners, the stakeholders, and all the ladies that are associated with this wonderful organization that I have personally looked up to when I was a young doctor, during the years of my growth and development. So it is very exciting for me to be here with you this evening. And I have to commend you on the great work that you're doing to inform professional women, business women, and help with growing the pipeline of capable women who are supported through your organization. So good evening, ladies, and thank you really much for having me here tonight. Well, I hope that you have all filled up your mugs and you're relaxing with a glass of wine. And while we're here, that somebody else is preparing dinner for a change. We're here to commemorate Women's Month. And this time of the year is special to me because it's also my birthday month. Every year, as I celebrate my birthday, I reflect on how far I've come, the successes, but also the failures of the past year. And I try and really look my goals in life and what I hope to achieve going forward. What makes this extra special for me is that I never reflect alone. I get a chance to reflect with women such as yourselves. Together during August month, we take stock of the growing influence we wield as women in society and the remaining work that needs to be done towards gender equality. The World Economic Forum, the Gender Parity Index, is a good measure of where we are as a country in regards to gender equality. Whilst we have retained our ranking as South Africa, as 18th in the world, there is absolutely no room for complacency. The pandemic has erased many of the efforts to enable gender equality here and around the world. In March of this year, almost half of women in South Africa who wanted to work were unable to find work. That is deeply shocking, and perhaps even more shocking are the limited prospects our young people, our future leaders, face in the labor market. A Black woman, 21 years of age, who is in the labor force, who is working or looking for work in 2008 would have had a 29% chance of being employed. In 2015, she had a 34% chance. That's not great, but it's better. But now, in 2021, her chances have actually dwindled to only 17%. This is not the trajectory that we want to be on, but there is hope. There are examples such as Rwanda, which has been a global top achiever in gender parity and is currently ranked 6th in the world. Rwanda shows what is possible, and their equality and economic progress illuminates both the challenges we must jointly confront, as well as the opportunities available to us when we ultimately succeed. Here at home, we have our success stories. We recently celebrated the historic win at the Olympics as Tatjana Schoenmaker set a world record for 200 meters breaststroke. And then there's also Tsakani Maluleke, who recently was appointed by our president as the Auditor General, the first woman to hold that position. There have been many others, and their success renew our hope of women breaking barriers and broadening those limits of what we can do. Now, today I was asked to speak to you about living beyond limits, which I interpret as living without limits. Now, this reminded me of a massage I had following an 18-hour flight overseas. Exhausted, I entered a room at the hotel and the massage therapist was already waiting for me. What threw me off was the Labrador sitting in the corner of the room, and the massage therapist, sensing that I was caught off guard by the dog, she looked straight at me and asked if I minded that the dog being in the room. Now, I'm terrified of big dogs because I had a terrible childhood experience where I was bitten by a dog. And at that time, my instincts told me to run after seeing this dog there. And at that moment, I wanted to leave the room immediately, but she said to me, "This is my guide dog." And that is the only time that I realized that she was actually blind and she was just about to give me a massage. I decided to confront my fear of dogs this time, and the guide dog led her out of the room whilst I changed. Now, I can tell you that 10 years after this experience, I have never encountered a massage therapist as good as her. Despite being blind, she noticed the slightest of things, like the red patch on my back, which was not raised to touch, but she sensed it. With a limit of her sight, she lived beyond limits, the limit of accomplishing things that others who don't have those same limits cannot. Now, this encounter encapsulates what living beyond limits means for me. It means living in freedom, in the full sense of what that word means, and allowing ourselves the full potential and purpose, just as this blind woman did, and not limiting ourselves or letting others set limits for us. It means allowing ourselves to find and focus on the opportunity and growth that is available to us, despite whatever challenges or limits we may be confronted with. Now, as we know, freedom requires work. It requires strength and courage of all of us. It is not given to us automatically as human beings in general, but particularly as women. It has to be attained. When I thought about this further, I realized that perhaps there are two kinds of limits that we should be aware of as women, and those require ongoing work from us. There are limits in the world of work and business and the household, where women have gained so much, but yet have to attain full equality. These limits are objective. They exist out there and constrain what is possible, and they still exclude women from many parts of the economy. And then there are limits, often subtle, but equally, if not more pervasive, that we set for ourselves as women, where in fact, we internalize voices that say, you can do this, but not that. You can climb this high, but not higher. Your role is here, but not there. So I wanted to talk to you firstly about internal limits and the ways in which we limit ourselves because of a particular upbringing, a particular culture, or experiences in an education system, whatever the case may be, and about how we can overcome these, and to share a few lessons that I hope I can share with you that I've learned living my life with you. Now, we in turn, and every one of you, are role models for young women and girls, and we show them through our actions, our example, our words, what is important. We create, whether we know it or not, and whether we want to or not, we create a sense of what the limits of possible are. Sometimes it may feel daunting, but that's what it is. As a woman who achieves success, you take risks and you live beyond the external limits that are imposed to you. There's always an overwhelming sense of responsibility and pressure to do well that comes with the territory. Now, recently I had a meeting with our bursary students that we fund through our Motsepe Foundation. And I saw this very same pressure manifesting in these young people, in that one of the students, a girl from Mpumalanga, who had left his community to go and study at UCT, felt the same pressure from her community, in that she felt if she does not do well at university, and if she doesn't achieve her dream, she will have not only let herself down, but she would have also let her community, and especially the young people in her community, down. Now, this drives me to improve her chances of success, and why I also want to talk to you a bit about our economy and the participation of women in it as teachers, nurses, managers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and also in the many unseen perspectives that we as women work within. So I believe that we need new economies now more than ever, economies that are more cooperative, resilient, and inclusive, which enable full equal participation of women. And this is an indispensable ingredient in getting us there. How do we overcome internal limits? I can tell you that as a young girl, as a young person growing up in Soweto, coming from a township, it was common for people to brush off dreams of others because of our circumstances. And most of you would know how limited prospects were in the 70s for a young girl growing up in the townships, and people with good intentions would say things like, you can't study in a whites-only university. It is impossible. But I did it. And I went to Wits and went on to open the first women's clinic in Sandton. Now, again, despite good advice that I was given, I went into practice in a white suburb where I was told success, prospects for succeeding were very grim. I listened to my inner voice and I refused to place limitations on myself or let anybody dictate to me what I could or could not do. Now, these experiences grew my confidence to overcome negative thoughts that we all have and the negative perspective of others. One needs to block those out. Now, I think at that time, my biggest mentor was my mom. She was my role model, who was a nurse, and she played a huge role in helping me to achieve my dreams. Even as a medical practitioner, I can tell you that a lot of us get our training, mentorship from nurses in hospitals. One cannot really learn the bedside manners, the intricate ways of dealing with patients from a textbook only. And it is through nurses like my mother and many other nurses that I met in hospitals that I learned how to become a doctor. Now, to honor my mom and the nurses who have taught me, as well as those who have been at the front line, particularly during this pandemic, I started a nursing scholarship, the Martha Rose Molloy Nursing Scholarship, through our family foundation to improve access to healthcare, because we know that access to healthcare and to education underpin attainments for equality in our lifetime. Now, how do we build inclusive economies? To go back to the story that I started on limits, it is not only internal limits, our own insecurities and a sense of inadequacy that keep us where we are. There are still real challenges in economic inclusion for women in South Africa and in many other countries that we have to address, and that constrain the extent to which we have to achieve SDG 5, or so-called gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. This last year, and just over 1.5 years, has put particular pressure on women in the economy. And some of the gains that we had made before COVID have been reversed or are at risk of being reversed. Over the 12 COVID months to March 2021, 1.4 million jobs were lost in South Africa, leading to a narrow unemployment rate of 32.6%, or a broad number of 43%. Apologies, I think we had lost, we had a technical problem there. Now, I was talking about how we build back. Over the 12 COVID months to March 2021, 1.4 million jobs were lost in the South African economy, leading to a narrow unemployment rate of 32.6% and a broad rate of 43.2%. Effectively, we now have the same number of overall jobs as we did in the middle of 2013, that is 8 years ago, but with a much larger number of people looking for work. The impact of job losses over these 12 months has certainly fallen on both men and women, but there are important differences. Proportionately, women have been more severely affected. Women's job losses of 643,000 since March 2020 represent a decrease in the total women's job of 9%. That is In other words, almost 1 out of 10 jobs held by women has been lost in just 12 months. Now, to add to this challenge, we have not done well at protecting the most vulnerable jobs, which has intensified the social impact of job losses. Our foundation recently completed work which divided occupations into a high, medium, and low band, depending on factors like skills, status, and income. In the high band, you have your professionals, your managers, and in the middle band, you have skilled and semi-skilled workers. And in the low band are what Stats SA calls elementary occupations. Now, what must concern us is that job losses have been concentrated in the medium and lower bands, and jobs in the higher bands for both men and women have essentially been protected from significant losses. One of the potential tragedies of the last year is the way it has eroded small business gains. We know that our economy is concentrated in many sectors and that this hampers inclusion as well as competitiveness and innovation. Over the last year, small and micro businesses have lost some of the foothold they had acquired in this economy. Now, let me give you one example. Smaller retailers, including spaza shops and the like, represent a significant instance of micro and survivalist entrepreneurship in South Africa. It is also an important employer of women working for themselves, but 73,000 jobs have been lost here since March 2020, of which 60,000 have been women's jobs. We dare not entrenched among South Africans in general, but specifically amongst our young women and girls, a sense that opportunities are limited and declining for them to participate fully in the economy. Earlier, I spoke about how each and every one of us is a role model for the young women and girls around us. But when we look at the economy and the fact that men continue to dominate as entrepreneurs, a key reason is surely still the shortage of female entrepreneurial and business leadership role models. South Africa does not yet have a deeply entrenched women's entrepreneurial culture, a fact illustrated comparatively by the comparatively lower rates of women as employers in general. Just before COVID-19, for example, 77% of employers were men and only 23% were women. In the private sector, gender inequality at a leadership and senior managerial level remains pronounced, with men occupying more than 70% of these positions. The 2020 Global Entrepreneurship Monitor noted that gender disparities in entrepreneurship diminished the startup potential for new businesses to contribute to the economy. In South Africa, it was added that the proximity to successful entrepreneurs for both men and women, boys and girls, are low. South Africa had scored second worst of all countries surveyed when asked if you knew someone who had started a business in the last 2 years. Living without limits does not mean that we should wish away or ignore the subtler constraints and challenges of women and entrepreneurs that we face. When we tried last year to support small and women-owned businesses in procuring PPEs for the state, we realized that many of the ecosystem features available to male entrepreneurs simply did not exist for women because they have been excluded from that system for generations. We cannot assume that women have equal access to tender information, equal recourse to business network support, equal status when it comes to negotiating business loans. Gender inequality in these contexts requires that we give careful thought to business mentoring, network, and business incubation support as part of ensuring that women entrepreneurs have a fair chance at success. Above all, I think that we need to establish a virtuous circle here, and all of us as women who are established in our professions or in our businesses can do a lot to promote that, where women demonstrate that business success is possible and in doing so, inspire others to do the same. I have focused a little bit on numbers because they help to give us a general and fact-based sense of what is happening in the economy. But each of us can confirm the sense of these numbers and their devastating impact from the experiences within our families, our own friends, and within our own communities. We need to build a new economy at a far from ideal time, but we don't have a choice. Inclusion, resilience, and cooperation need to be the hallmarks of that economy, and placing these at the center will in turn generate the innovation and competitiveness that will allow us to prosper domestically and flourish internationally. We cannot fix growth and then expect our societies to heal. In healing our societies, we create the conditions for growth, not just any growth, but inclusive growth. Fundamentally, the economic solutions we require are not narrow technical matters, but shifts in values, shifts in our national conversations about what is truly important. From these value-orientated conversations and conclusions, we can then move to the economy, not the other way around. Now, the good news is, I think that the kinds of debates we're having in South Africa currently, because we must have them, are occurring all over the world in many spaces. I want to touch briefly on a few key principles that will guide us into the economies that I believe we need. In the era that we live in, where the motto for innovators in Silicon Valley is to move fast and break things, our environment is often competitive and rapidly changing. In this era of innovation, we have glamorized and almost aggressive individualism. Competition and individualism can be healthy, especially when they encourage us to try new things, to take risks, and to be bold. But within this competitiveness, we have grown far removed from one another. We have started to operate in silos where our individual innovations are propelled more than ever before, but the collective impact of our innovation has been reduced. And we sometimes think and speak as though we owed all our successes to ourselves as individuals rather than families, communities, society, and the economy in which we are embedded. The rhetoric of success as an individual achievement inhibits our ability to work together. For example, when I established African Fashion International, the goal was to develop a single platform for African fashion designers to showcase and grow their influence in global markets. Over a decade of growing AFI, which has become an established brand globally, that identifies well-known designers as well as the lesser-known designers and propels them into European American runways, we have pinpointed a single inhibitor to growing the fashion industry on the continent. And that single inhibitor is collaboration. For our African designers to be recognized globally, they must first be appreciated locally. Across each region of the continent, I have met the most incredible designers who have tremendous talent, but they lack the networks to connect across industries and amongst themselves to truly realize their potential. We see a similar problem, a tension between cooperation and individualism in the development of most sectors in the economy. But to stay with the fashion industry for a moment, in order to create a garment, there is a designer who creates style, but behind them are agricultural workers who grow the raw materials. There are manufacturers who process that raw material into fabric. There is the chemist who develops the dye, and the seamstress who sews it all together before it arrives at the retailer, where we then purchase it from the retailers. For the fashion industry to thrive, the system of all these interconnected parts must cooperate as well as compete but cooperation does not occur enough. And I think this is true for many other economic sectors. By cooperate, I don't mean that we should collude. And I mean that in terms on which we work with each other and need to be fair with each other so that the economic value is distributed fairly. This theme of cooperation, partnership, and fair-mindedness goes beyond value chains and sectors. There is a good chance that this 21st century in which we are the adults and the leaders will be one that is defined by crises, and by crises that require partnerships across these neat lines we sometimes want to draw between the public and the private sector, between one country and another, between insiders and outsiders. I believe that the era of silos is over, and I urge you all to think about what this might mean in your own context as a businesswoman or a professional woman. I emphasized the losses, and particularly the labor market losses of the last year. But in the past year, we've also seen something else, a sense of solidarity, of people helping each other, because that is what human beings do. In our personal lives, many of us have relearned the value of connecting and interpersonal support. Being isolated from loved ones, we began to appreciate the value of caring for others and bringing love into our workspaces and within our families. We learned from this crisis that we can do far more together than we can do alone. The important thing is to carry this spirit forward. If we do so, we can bridge the divide between our two economies, one which is modern and generates wealth, and the other which is under-resourced, vulnerable, and less likely to get fair access to markets and opportunities. A majority of women are represented in the second economy, and this is the economy which has been hardest hit by COVID. Building the social economy has become a key focus areas for us at the Motsepe Foundation. I believe that the social economy holds immense potential to bridge the two economic divides, to create jobs and drive innovation, and to address many of our social challenges. It is value-orientated at its core, and therefore can help us to put values-driven debates at the center of our policymaking again. We do not need to reinvent the wheel in seeking to grow the social economy. Cooperatives and stokvels are an essential part of our local economies and our own histories as well. What is fascinating about cooperatives and other social enterprises is their rejection of the status quo of competition in favor of collaboration. These enterprises go against the grain to form community-driven partnerships. So how do we support them? How do we scale up these forms of mutual help whilst keeping the essential character intact? This is an area that the foundation and I hope others will focus on in the next few years as part of our social economy work. Building the social economy must include building social entrepreneurship amongst Africa's youth and women. The youth of today are often values-driven. They're keen to find ways to make a difference, and they're tech-savvy. This brings me to the challenge I wish to extend to all of you today. Let us use our networks, our knowledge, our skills, and our assets to uplift. Let us bridge the divide between the two economies by building a collaborative ecosystem. As we continue to live with the pandemic, we are witnessing a shift towards compassion and empathy in our society, but we have also witnessed the shadow side of our own country, the expression of anger, resentment, violence at greatest cost to us. As leaders and managers and entrepreneurs, we have essential roles to play in ensuring that we steer in the right direction, which is that of inclusion and dialogue, which in turn strengthens our resilience as a society. At the Motsepe Foundation, we invest in the future of South Africa and the future of our young people by providing bursaries to students to study at university. And in my hat as CEO of the foundation, as well as my hat as Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, it was a turning point in access to education when schools were closed and began to implement remote learning. Remote learning is an example of how inequality in South Africa creates the poverty trap. Students from low socioeconomic backgrounds at universities are able to keep pace with other students whilst on campus. But when they returned home, this was no longer the case. Students who did not have laptops were unable to utilize labs. Students without internet connectivity were unable to attend lectures, engage with their peers, or complete assignments. Students living in homes that are unconducive to learning were unable to make space to focus on their aspirations. And yet a powerful transformation occurred during this time. Universities collaborated with mobile networks to enable free or low-cost internet access. Alumni and others donated to universities to purchase and deliver laptops to students in need. Universities enhanced their mental health support to assist students with coping with the new pressures of working at home. And amidst this, the universities that are considered as under-resourced and high risk in terms of sporadic protest action were able to invest in technology and other services to catch up with the previously white universities that are more established. There are significant investment in resources that students need were a result of community, public-private partnerships that have paved the way for the new normal. This solidarity that we have initiated cannot be lost as we transition. Instead, this solidarity is what we should use to guide us as we reimagine the new normal, because our solidarity has enabled empathy, compassion, and the ability to do quickly what we have tried to do for many years. At the South African University Chancellor's Forum, which was recently launched in June this year, Higher Education and Training Minister Blade Nzimande made a point regarding collaboration. In his remarks, he alluded to the need for universities to support TVET, the TVET sector, because as universities become overburdened with applicants, improvements in TVET sector can support universities in alleviating their burden. As universities focus on their mission and of responding to immediate socioeconomic challenges, they risk losing their longer-term focus to become hubs of knowledge and social justice-driven interrogation. I use this example because regardless of the sector we consider, there are paths that are interconnected, where support must be extended beyond our own individual lens. We have been able to change our outlook in this regard, and it is imperative that we do not lose this momentum. This year has exposed deep pre-existing vulnerabilities and tensions in economies and societies around the world, including South Africa's, and demands that we act upon inequality and that we act differently than we have in the past. Now, as we consider compassionate leadership, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the first woman African to lead the World Trade Organization as Director General, speaks often about her leadership style as inclusive of community participation. And Professor Wangari Maathai, the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, can be said to have been a caring leader, caring for both humanity and the environment when she launched the Green Belt movement. These exemplary examples of compassionate leadership is the new normal, and it gives women greater opportunity to participate in the building of this collaborative ecosystem. Compassionate leadership is almost an oxymoron for those who understand leadership as an autocratic, headstrong, and results-driven role. But what it asks of us is to find balance. As women, we have come to understand that bringing too much empathy into the workplace stifles our actions and our ability to make tough decisions. But as we've seen in this past year, the indifference to the well-being of others can equally be devastating and can actually miss the point. In South Africa, we have 3 million discouraged work seekers. Their exit from the labor market can be attributed to many factors, but one of these factors, not highlighted often enough, is harsh working environments. It is further estimated that 17 million people in South Africa are coping with mental illness. Striking a balance in the workplace between a healthy pressure that enables people to bring the best out of themselves and a compassionate lens that recognizes when kindness and not pressure is not needed can transform our society on a much broader scale, and in fact, will also improve the now narrower company productivity metrics. But achieving this balance as leaders requires that we achieve it in ourselves first. We can only be gentle with others if we are gentle with ourselves. So I also want to urge you to look after yourselves, look after your bodies, look after your minds, look after your spirits in order to be able to look after others. I have touched on a few themes today, and they may not seem closely related. The injunction to be a role model, to be kind to oneself, to seek balance. This sort of language may sit uneasily with the numbers-orientated language we use to talk about the economy. But in fact, they are inseparable. South Africa is the embodiment, tragically, of how the intangible factors that don't get counted in the national accounts, such as trauma, social tension, lack of good role models, inequality, constrains getting to our economic potential. As women, we have a huge role to play in transforming the limited ways we think about the economy. As a collective of women responding to this turning point in history, I applaud your willingness to forge ahead and remain bold in your mission to uplift and leave behind a legacy for generations of young girls to build upon. We have been collectively impacted by the pandemic. The impact of the pandemic has stretched across gender, race, nationality, and across class boundaries. We must acknowledge that we are not alone in rebuilding from this crisis. We are a collective that is under pressure to make the right decisions that will result in the best overall outcome. How we move forward must reflect this collective discomfort and inspire collective-driven change. If I leave you with one message, as the Business Women's Association and as individuals, it is that limits challenge us to find alternative pathways to success. So I challenge you to be brave and follow these alternative pathways. We may also find the most sustainable and inclusive ways of living and being as a society. I wish to close with the words of Maya Angelou when she said, "You may encounter defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. I thank you all for spending this evening with us. And like they say in yoga, namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Precious. You mentioned that in the beginning of your journey, your mother was your role model and you drew wisdom from her and she mentored you, especially in your medical journey. We would like to know, what advice would you give to the 21-year-old Precious as a role model, now that you're a role model and a mentor?
Well, thank you for those kind words. It's often very difficult to talk to yourself. But I guess what I would tell my younger self is to take time to appreciate who I am, and also to know that where I was at that time is not my destiny, and that I can grow and become whatever I wanted to be if I continued to follow my dreams, which I have. And I think the other thing I would tell myself is to enjoy life and not be hard on myself.
Mm-hmm. No, that's wonderful. So this journey of yours that you've described to us so beautifully sounds almost perfect. But as anyone who has gone on any journey knows, that you encounter failures. So what has been your most defining failure in this journey?
Yeah, that's a very challenging question. And I think it's very important that we must always never look at failure as failure, but as a point of learning. This is what I was saying to young students who are at varsity, who are part of the foundation, that fear of failure can actually be debilitating, and we must never be fearful to fail, because these are two sides of a coin. You either fail and you succeed, and if you fail, you will have learned something from the failure. I think in my personal example, I had finished medical school and I had then gone on to do a postgraduate degree in pediatrics. I passed the first year, and then they normally have a limited number of places available for one to study on to become a specialist in pediatrics. And I didn't make it. I didn't make that group that was taken to further their studies in pediatrics, and I was devastated. But when I took time off, this is how I dealt with it. I took time off, I reflected on what this meant for me, and I realized that's not really what I wanted to do. What I had wanted to do from the time I was a young child was to work more amongst women. And that's when I then left and pursued women's health. I went and studied women's health with Stellenbosch University, and then I established my women's health clinic in Rivonia in Sandton. And I really enjoyed that. I realized only then that actually my calling at that time was to work amongst women, and that was my passion. It's always been my passion. So I haven't lost out. I learned what I needed to do at that time. And looking back now, I've also established a scholarship for doctors who want to study pediatrics. So I always say, no, that was not a loss, because now I can, help other students, medical doctors who want to specialize in pediatrics.
So you moved from your calling, which is medicine, to fashion. Was fashion always your passion, or how did that fit in? How did you transition?
The transition was, I think, almost a natural one. Firstly, yes, because I was passionate about, I've always been passionate about Africa, our continent. I've always been passionate about our creatives. I have been passionate about, what our designers are able to create. And this was strengthened for me when I traveled the world and realized that, you know, in whether it's France or in Italy or in the States, designers there had a system that supported them to become brands that were commercially viable. But back home, we had designers who were operating as showpieces, but there was no commercial activity. So my coming into the industry was first, yes, you know, because I was passionate about the industry, but I also wanted to see how I could grow my business sense and my business side, and work with women, empower women who are either designers, seamstresses, women who work in the industry as you know, models, or work in the industry as photographers, videographers. There is so much that happens in the industry, as I said to you, from the time, from the agri side, agriculture side, right through the value chain to the retail side. So I wanted to bring the commercial sense into this industry, and therefore AFI established itself to promote the business of fashion.
You spoke of stokvels and cooperatives as a different means for growing our businesses, especially in the township sector. So in the spirit of empowering other women, what would you say it takes to make a small business investor ready?
Could you just repeat that question, please?
What would it take to make a small business investor ready?
I think, you know, when I look at my own journey, starting my own businesses, from the women's clinic to the business that I have now, I needed to know my business. I needed to know the ins and outs of the business. I needed to know who was playing in the sector. I needed to pick the right role models. I needed to understand what the business model was before I could even go to an investor. So for my women's clinic, my first investor, of course, was my family. And once I had developed this center, which I believed could provide a one-stop shop for women, from teenage girls right up to women in their menopause, I had packages for every woman, you know, right throughout their lifetime, whether they were pregnant or they were, you know, during their reproductive health or post-menopause. And with these packages, I knew how I could then price them properly, and I understood the market I was dealing with. I understood the women that I was dealing with. The gap in the market was already there, clearly. There were no doctors who were providing a one-stop shop for women, you know, in the manner that I was. So once I had gone through that, understanding my business, understanding, you know, the business model, understanding my customers, then I could sit down and actually work on the projections, you know, the financials, bring in people who could help me with those, and then approach the investors, showing them the potential of the business, showing them the business case, and actually showing them that there were definitely returns in investing in the business that I had. So I think my personal journey, that's how I made sure that I was ready for investors when the time came.
And you have a knack for operating in male-dominated fields and dominating in those fields. So how would you advise women who want to ensure that they are respected for their crafts within their respective industries?
You have to know your stuff. You have to know your craft, because nobody can ignore you if you know your stuff, if you know your industry. You are up to date with the ins and outs of your industry. I would say also make sure that you connect with others within the industry. BWA offers a fantastic platform for women to network. Those networks are important. You may be talking to people who will work with you in future, people who might make you see something that you never thought of, you know, so you know, and also look for role models in the areas that you work. My role models, when I started my women's practice, some of them were not even in South Africa. They were in the States. I had learned about women's health businesses by learning, you know, from others that I saw in the States when I worked there. So it is important that you model yourself against somebody that you truly admire. You don't have to be working closely with them, but understanding how they worked and how they respond to their challenges. And I would often ask myself, if I had a problem, for instance, I wonder how so-and-so would react to this problem. So then I remove myself from the problem and I think about it without actually becoming too attached emotionally to the answers and solutions that I came up with. I think it is important to have those kind of relationships. And now in this digital economy, where one can learn so much on the internet, there is no reason why you cannot become an eternal student. That's how I've managed to grow in an industry like the fashion industry that I knew absolutely nothing about except as a consumer. I had to actually learn from scratch about how the industry operates, who the players are. So I believed truly in ongoing learning.
Mm. And you touched on compassionate leadership. As women, how can we use our board seats to ensure good governance and accountability in boards?
How can we use our
board seats so we can ensure good governance?
Yes, absolutely. Again, make sure that you're knowledgeable. Make sure that you're knowledgeable, because if you're sitting in a boardroom and you have to make important inputs, it helps a lot if you know what you are talking about. Make sure that you're knowledgeable. Make sure that you network with other board members so that you can understand. I want to encourage people to read Nolita Fakude's book, Boardroom Dancing. It is a fantastic book to read on how to juggle the politics in the boardroom so that the contributions you make around the table are heard, that you are heard, that your voice is heard, that your contribution matters. And make sure that whilst you have that board seat, you really make a difference, not only for yourself, but for people that are in your company, whether it's the fact that you promote and push the diversity and inclusion angle, always looking for that, or you encourage learning and continuous development of the staff in your company. That is very important. So I think as a board member, it is such a fantastic opportunity for you, not only to improve yourself, but to also make a difference whilst you're sitting in that chair. It's unfortunate that because we have such few women at these levels, those of you who have an opportunity to be in those rooms actually represent not only yourselves and your companies, we represent many women around the country. It is a huge responsibility, and make sure that when you leave, you make it count.
I absolutely agree. And finally, we'd like to know what's next for the woman who seems to have it all.
I don't believe there is such a word. I don't believe there's anybody who has it all. I believe that we are all driven to become better than we were yesterday. That's what drives us. You know, as I said, continuous learning, continuous exposure, and you know, the joy of knowing that you're making a difference in other people's lives, I think is what really drives me.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Precious. On behalf of BOASA and the Directors Association, I'd like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Precious. Thank you for taking the time to share your story and your wisdom with us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of our partners.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you for joining us this evening. please go to www.womensmonth21.co.za to sign up for the rest of our events for this Women's Month. We have an amazing lineup waiting for you. And if you'd like to know more about securing a BWASA membership, then please drop us an email at BWASAGP, that's BWASAGP @womensmonth21.co.za. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Where do we?